When everyone else the evening had started like any other small gathering in the apartment I rented from Mrs. Patel, my landlady. Friends and neighbors came and went, the air filled with the low hum of conversation, clinking glasses, and occasional laughter. I had expected nothing more than polite smiles and small talk, but when her friend arrived, something shifted. She carried herself with quiet elegance, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that made the room feel fuller the moment she entered. Her presence seemed to settle into the corners of the apartment like a soft light, warm and unassuming. I noticed the subtle grace of her movements immediately, the way her fingers lingered on the back of a chair as she passed, the gentle sweep of her hair behind her ear, the calm confidence in the curve of her posture. There was a faint, inviting perfume, subtle but distinct, a mixture of jasmine and something earthy that grounded the space around her. She greeted me with a smile that was easy but thoughtful, like she had a memory tucked behind it. The evening progressed normally. Conversations flowed, jokes were shared, and glasses were refilled. Then, one by one, the other guests began to leave. The apartment quieted, the clamor of laughter replaced by the soft hum of the city outside. Streetlights filtered through the windows, casting long, warm shadows across the living room. And then, unexpectedly, she stayed. Everyone else had gone home, leaving just the two of us, an unspoken awareness settling into the space between us. I felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere immediately. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was laden with anticipation, like the room itself had been holding its breath. She moved closer to help tidy the table, her fingers brushing against mine as we reached for the same stack of napkins. The contact was brief, accidental, yet I felt the warmth linger far longer than it should have. It was the kind of touch that makes the air around you feel heavier, charged with a quiet awareness that something delicate, something intimate, was beginning to form. Her eyes met mine over the rim of a wine glass. After the last guest had quietly slipped out into the night, the apartment felt unusually still, yet alive with a subtle warmth. She moved about the space with a relaxed elegance, gathering stray napkins and picking up empty glasses. I found myself offering to help, though the gesture felt unnecessary. She clearly had a rhythm to her movements, a gentle precision that made even the simplest task seem graceful. Our hands brushed more than once while reaching for the same dish or glass, a fleeting contact that sent a surprising pulse through me. It was light, almost accidental, but my body registered it like an unspoken conversation. Each brush of skin, each overlapping reach, carried a quiet warmth, the kind that lingers long after the physical touch has passed. I noticed how her fingers felt soft yet purposeful, how her grip on a glass was steady but unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. We started talking as we worked, the conversation initially casual, yet layered with small hints of curiosity. She asked about my work, my interests, and the little rhythms of my everyday life. Her voice warm and gentle, yet carrying the richness of someone who had seen more of the world. I listened intently, caught by the way her laughter softened the room, resonating not just in my ears, but in the spaces between us. It was rich and melodic, full of warmth, and it made the ordinary feel intimate. As she spoke, I noticed the subtle way she revealed herself, the tilt of her head when sharing a memory, the brief pause when a thought made her hesitate, the way her eyes crinkled softly at the corners as she smiled. Her presence was commanding without being imposing, a quiet authority that made me instinctively lean slightly closer, seeking proximity without even realizing it. I could feel the faint heat radiating from her as she leaned to pick up a pillow, and the scent of her perfume, a gentle mix of jasmine and something earthy, lingered in the air, threading itself into the quiet of the room. There was something compelling about the way she moved in the space, the fluidity of her gestures, the subtlety of her expressions. When our hands met briefly over the edge of a dish, I didn't pull away immediately. I allowed the contact to linger, savoring the warmth, the silent acknowledgement that passed between us in that small, unremarkable touch. The world outside the apartment had faded, leaving just the two of us in a bubble of quiet intimacy. By the time we had finished tidying, a subtle tension had woven itself into the room, not urgent or desperate, but gentle and insistent. Our eyes met often, carrying a curiosity and understanding that words hadn't yet articulated. I was keenly aware of her presence beside me, the way the warmth of her body brushed against mine when we reached for the same items, the lingering softness in her gestures. It was in these small, accidental moments, the brushing of hands, the shared smiles, the quiet laughter, that a connection began to form, delicate but undeniable. That night, I realized that intimacy didn't always arrive with grand declarations or sweeping gestures. Sometimes, it slipped quietly into the spaces between touches, the pauses in conversation, and the subtle glances that lingered just a heartbeat too long. And in that soft, warm evening, with her beside me, I felt that slow, tender spark ignite, the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was ready to name, yet couldn't ignore. Had been clearing, and for a moment, the world outside the apartment, the noise, the obligations, the everyday routine, faded. There was a softness in her gaze, a kind of patient curiosity, as if she were quietly observing me while simultaneously letting me observe her. I became acutely aware of the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her shoulders shifted as she leaned slightly to set a glass down, the faint sound of her necklace catching against her collarbone. Even in that simple moment, I sensed a gentle tension building, unspoken, unforced, and profoundly human. The night had started like any other, but with her lingering presence, something had changed. And I realized, with a quiet, insistent awareness, that I wanted to notice every small detail of her. The tilt of her head, the warmth in her smile, the softness of her voice, because this unexpected encounter was already beginning to settle into my mind, and, unexpectedly, my heart. In tea home, I didn't expect her to stay, and after the last dishes were stacked and the faint hum of the city seeped through the apartment windows, we settled into the living room. The warm glow of a single lamp cast soft shadows across the room, the light brushing her features in a way that made every subtle expression feel meaningful. There was a quiet rhythm to the space now, nothing forced, nothing hurried, just the two of us lingering in the aftermath of the evening. We sank into the sofa, an almost accidental closeness forming as we both reached for the same throw pillow. Her hand brushed mine briefly, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the room's ambient heat. It was the gentle acknowledgement of shared presence, a fleeting intimacy that made the world outside the apartment seem impossibly distant. Her fingers lingered near mine, not intentionally, not provocatively, but naturally, as if the space between us had quietly contracted, inviting connection. The conversation drifted from light anecdotes to deeper, more personal reflections. She spoke of her younger years with a wistful clarity, moments of joy interwoven with regrets and lessons learned. Her voice carried a soft cadence, a gentle gravity that made each word resonate. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn not only to the stories but to the way she told them. The subtle inflections, the pauses where memories weighed heavy, the occasional flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. I shared my own experiences, tentative at first, aware of the generational gap that separated us, but also drawn to her attentiveness, her patient listening. She offered insights not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding that seemed to bridge the distance between us. Each glance, each tilt of her head, each soft smile, carried an unspoken reassurance, a wordless intimacy that felt as grounding as it did stirring. There were moments when our hands almost touched again, a casual reach for a cup of tea, a shift of the cushion, a light brush of her sleeve against my arm. Each contact, fleeting as it was, sent a subtle ripple of awareness through me. The world shrank to the warm circle of light around us, to the scent of her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of brewed tea, to the gentle cadence of her voice that seemed to echo in the quiet corners of the apartment. I noticed the small, human details that made her presence so compelling. The slight exhale that accompanied a memory, the way her eyes softened when she spoke about something dear to her, the effortless grace of her gestures. And in these quiet observations, I felt a stirring of something I had not expected, a pull toward her that was more than curiosity, more than attraction. It was the beginning of emotional intimacy, the kind that forms slowly, subtly, in the spaces between words and touches. As the evening wore on, there was no grand confession, no dramatic gesture, just a steady, unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of our mutual attention and growing connection. In that quiet, lamp-lit living room, I realized that intimacy could be born in softness and silence, in the gentle resonance of shared vulnerability. And in that moment, sitting beside her, feeling the faint warmth radiating from her presence, I knew that something significant had begun, fragile, tentative, and entirely undeniable. The apartment had settled into a comfortable quiet, the city outside casting long, mellow shadows through the windows. After the previous hours of soft confessions and reflective conversation, the air between us felt lighter, yet charged with an unspoken understanding. It was the kind of silence that wasn't awkward. It was intimate, ripe with possibility. She reached for the stack of coasters on the coffee table, and I couldn't help but tease her about her careful, almost ritualistic way of handling things. A laugh escaped her, soft and melodic, and it filled the space between us like sunlight spilling across the floor. "You make it sound like I'm overthinking a coaster," she said, her voice playful but warm. She nudged my shoulder lightly, just enough to make me flinch and smile simultaneously. The contact was brief, yet its effect lingered, a subtle pulse of awareness that made me acutely conscious of her proximity. As we settled onto the sofa, our conversation wandered to lighter topics: favorite movies, childhood memories, and minor misadventures. Each story she shared was colored with her wit and charm, and each time I laughed, I noticed the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the gentle tilt of her head, the soft way her lips curved upward. These small details etched themselves into my mind, each movement a quiet reminder of her presence. She reached for a cushion at the same time I did, and our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. A warmth spread through me, subtle but undeniable. The lingering contact wasn't provocative, but it was intimate. It carried a silent acknowledgement of the growing connection between us. I realized that these small gestures, these fleeting touches and shared smiles, were becoming the heartbeat of our interaction. There were moments of quiet playfulness too. She teased me gently about my tendency to overanalyze, and I countered with a mock-serious glare. The exchange was lighthearted, yet beneath it was a trust and comfort that went beyond casual acquaintance. It was as if we were both testing the waters, exploring the edges of closeness while savoring the ease of shared laughter. Even in this playful atmosphere, the tension simmered beneath the surface. Every brush of her hand against mine, every fleeting glance across the coffee table, carried an unspoken curiosity. I became acutely aware of the soft warmth radiating from her, the gentle scent of her perfume lingering in the air, and the way her voice, even in jest, seemed to draw me closer. Each moment was a balance, the thrill of connection tempered by the unspoken understanding of boundaries and respect. By the end of the evening, a new rhythm had formed between us, a blend of laughter, gentle touches, and shared observation. There was a growing sense of companionship, of two people learning to exist in the same space with a mixture of ease and tender attention. I felt a quiet anticipation, the kind that comes from discovering someone whose presence makes the ordinary extraordinary. And in that calm, lamp-lit living room, I realized that the slow burn of connection was no longer subtle. It was undeniable, quietly weaving itself into the fabric of the evening, leaving me both exhilarated and achingly aware of her nearness. The room had grown quieter, the soft hum of the city outside now a distant backdrop to the charged silence that settled between us. After hours of shared stories, laughter, and fleeting touches, there was a pause, a moment that stretched longer than either of us expected. I noticed the way she shifted on the sofa, her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted a cushion. The contact was brief, casual, but my chest tightened at the simple warmth of her touch. Her eyes met mine, and in that glance, there was a depth I hadn't fully registered before. It wasn't just curiosity or friendliness. There was a quiet vulnerability there, paired with a strength that made me ache to understand it. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the small distance between us, but something held me back. It was respect, caution, and the unspoken awareness of the gap between our lives. Her experiences, her maturity, the world she had navigated long before I had. We talked less in words now and more in silences. Each pause carried meaning, and every casual movement felt loaded with unspoken questions. When she leaned slightly closer to reach for a teacup, the warmth of her body brushed against mine. I felt my pulse quicken, a quiet rush of awareness spreading through me. And yet, I did nothing. I let the moment hover, fragile and fleeting, because I sensed she might be hesitating too. There was a delicate tension in the room, like the subtle quiver of a stringed instrument before a note is played. Our hands came close again, almost touching as we reached for the same object, and this time, I let my fingers linger just a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was enough to convey attention, to signal care, without breaking the invisible boundary of propriety. I noticed her intake of breath, soft, almost imperceptible, and the way her eyes softened as she met mine. Internally, I wrestled with a swirl of emotions, admiration, attraction, and a hesitant longing that was tempered by awareness. I was aware of the societal expectations, the whispers of judgment that could arise from an age gap connection. Yet the pull toward her felt undeniable. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile seemed to intensify this magnetic tension between us. We didn't speak of it, we didn't need to. The room was a delicate dance of proximity and restraint. I noticed the scent of her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of tea, the soft rise and fall of her chest, and the subtle shift in her posture when she leaned slightly toward me. Each small observation added layers to the internal conflict building inside me. I wanted to cross the line, to reach for something more tangible, yet I also wanted to honor the quiet pace that had brought us this far. As the minutes passed, the tension neither dissipated nor broke. Instead, it settled into something heavier, more profound, a quiet acknowledgement that both of us were standing on the edge of something significant, unsure of whether to step forward or hold back. And in that suspended moment, I realized that the slow burn of connection had matured into a delicate, almost painful anticipation, the kind that makes every glance, every touch, every breath feel impossibly important. The apartment felt smaller now, though not in a constricting way. It was as if the space had drawn in around us, concentrating the warmth, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the gentle intimacy that had been building for hours. We sat close on the sofa, the distance between us measured in inches rather than feet, and for the first time, I sensed a shift, a subtle permission for something more tender, more personal, to emerge. She reached for the teapot to pour another cup, her fingers brushing the edge of my hand as she passed it to me. This time, I didn't recoil, nor did she withdraw. Instead, the contact lingered just a fraction longer, enough to feel the warmth of her skin, the faint pressure of her fingers, and the grounding steadiness of her presence. It was a small gesture, almost ordinary, yet it carried the weight of everything that had come before. The shared stories, the laughter, the accidental touches, the quiet confessions. Her eyes met mine in that moment, and I caught a flicker of something, curiosity, reassurance, maybe even a hint of the same longing I felt. I reached out subtly, placing my hand over hers as it rested near the teacup. The warmth of her palms seeped into mine, steadying me in a way I hadn't expected. The touch was brief, tender, and safe, yet it was electric in its intimacy. My heart beat faster, not from urgency or need, but from the quiet acknowledgement that we were crossing a line we had both been circling for hours. We sat there in silence, letting the moment stretch without words. I became aware of the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the soft exhale as she relaxed her hand in mine, the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine, warm, earthy, mingled with the aroma of tea and the lingering glow of the lamp, creating a sensory cocoon that seemed to exist solely for us. I noticed the way her shoulders eased, the slight tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her lips in a quiet, unspoken smile. Every detail heightened the sense of closeness, of shared awareness, of intimacy without need for speech. It was in this simple act, hands touching, lingering, and holding, that the tension of the past hours found its first release. Not in passion, not in urgency, but in the quiet acknowledgement that we had found a connection, delicate and profound. I felt an unspoken conversation pass between us, trust, curiosity, desire tempered by respect. The warmth of her hand against mine carried a promise, a tentative bridge towards something deeper. For the first time, I allowed myself to lean slightly closer, a subtle motion that brought us nearer without breaking the gentle pace we had cultivated. She responded instinctively, shifting just enough to meet the proximity, her eyes holding mine with an openness that both thrilled and comforted me. The moment was electric in its subtlety, a perfect embodiment of the slow-burn connection that had been forming from the very first accidental touch. And when she finally released my hand, it wasn't with withdrawal but with a lingering grace, as if leaving a trace of warmth behind. I realized, sitting there with the memory of that touch still resonating through me, that intimacy could be quiet, tender, and profoundly satisfying. In that first gentle contact, the story of us had begun in earnest, a slow, deliberate dance of closeness, trust, and burgeoning desire that neither of us could ignore. By now, the apartment had fallen into a calm, almost sacred quiet. The city outside hummed faintly through the window panes, distant and muted, while inside, the space was filled with the gentle warmth of the lamp's glow and the lingering presence of her. The evening had shifted from casual conversation to quiet confessions, playful teasing, hesitant touches, and finally, the first gentle acknowledgement of connection. And now, as the night deepened, there was a sense of completeness, of a moment shared that would linger long after she left. She stood near the door, adjusting her coat, and I found myself studying the way she moved, graceful, unhurried, every gesture carrying the same quiet confidence that had drawn me to her from the start. For a brief moment, I hesitated, unsure if I should speak or remain still, as if any movement might disturb the delicate balance of intimacy we had built. Then, almost instinctively, I stepped closer. Her eyes met mine, soft and steady, and she offered a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a smile of flirtation or expectation. It was a smile of acknowledgement, a recognition of everything that had passed between us tonight, the laughter, the quiet conversation, the shared warmth, and the subtle tension that had grown into something tender and undeniable. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of admiration and longing, tempered by the quiet satisfaction of knowing we had arrived here naturally, with patience and respect. She leaned in slightly, and I felt the faint exhale of her breath, a soft warmth against my chest as she wrapped her arms around me in a gentle, lingering hug. Her cheek rested lightly against my shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. I could feel the steady pulse of her heartbeat, the softness of her hair brushing against my neck, and the quiet steadiness of her presence grounding me in a way that words never could. I placed my hand lightly on her back, responding with the same care and tenderness, savoring the unspoken language of touch that had been building all evening. When we finally pulled apart, it was only slightly, just enough to meet eyes again. The warmth lingered in the space between us, in the subtle curve of her lips, in the soft glint of understanding in her eyes. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet certainty that this connection, however delicate, was real and meaningful. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, both for the night itself and for the trust and openness that had allowed us to share these moments. As she stepped toward the door to leave, she paused and glanced back at me, her smile carrying a promise of more conversation, more shared moments, more quiet touches that spoke louder than words ever could. I watched her leave, feeling the apartment seem emptier, yet somehow fuller because of the echo of her presence. The scent of her perfume lingered, faint but comforting, mingling with the memory of her laughter and the warmth of her hand in mine. I sank back into the sofa, heart still quietly racing, mind replaying every glance, every brush of skin, every shared laugh. The night had begun with a casual encounter, but it had evolved into something profound, tender, and utterly human. I realized that intimacy could be built in small, deliberate moments, in gentle touches, in laughter, in shared silence. And in that realization, I felt a quiet joy, a sense of anticipation for what was yet to come, knowing that this slow, careful dance of connection had only just begun.